Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming in and listening to our presentation today. The Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians was challenged by our chief to provide some more information and offer something different and new to this event. And so we're very pleased to be able to offer a series of presentations here in this Rasmuson Theater, and we are very appreciative to the National Museum of the American Indian for allowing us to be here to do that. This afternoon we have a presentation, the last one for today, but certainly not the weekend, called The Cosmography of Water. This presentation explores some of the traditional stories that are placed in or near many rivers and creeks in the Aboriginal Cherokee territory. Through discussion of specific stories and locations, this presentation demonstrates the cultural relevance of Cherokee traditional landscape and how that understanding shapes Cherokee worldview. It is my pleasure to introduce Mr. T.J. Holland. Mr. Holland is an enrolled member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians and is from the Snowbird community. As the tribe's cultural resources supervisor, his responsibilities include management for Junaluska Memorial Site and the museum, historic research, and cultural perpetuation. TJ holds a bachelor's in fine arts from Western Carolina University and is active in many tribal and community organizations. Please join me in welcoming Mr. TJ Holland.
Boy, I get really nervous when people applaud before I start talking. It kind of sets a standard that I don't know I'll be able to meet. Thank you all for coming. It's an honor to be here at this place and to speak to y'all about these things. Before we get started with the slideshow, I just thought I'd go ahead and kind of set the stage for what this is. Even to the definition of the word cosmography, it's kind of a big $64 hard to pronounce sometimes if you just read it out. But really what this cosmography is a combination of the ideas of cosmology, which all cultures have, and it's usually related to the stars, and looking at how human beings kind of find their place in existence, looking on from the outside. And the simple concept of geography and the places that we're surrounded by. So cosmography in this sense is our stories, our traditions that are connected to place. And this project is part of a bigger project where we do tours, we do a lot of public education within the communities and outside of the communities, letting people, giving folks an opportunity to go to these places, to tell the stories, where the stories happened. I know there's some storytellers up on the fourth floor and in our traditional stories, and some if anyone here attended some of the earlier discussions, where the origin of disease and medicine, there's places in the landscape where the bears held their council, where the other animals got together and held their councils. And we're really fortunate to be able to, where we live in the Eastern Band of Western North Carolina, to be able, in a lot of cases, to just drive to these places and go see them. A lot of times they're right off the side of the road on some of our highways and things. So this isn't places that are long lost to us. So let's start out looking at this just through the lens of geography. And this is one of the earlier British maps. These the guys the cartographers who wrote this were down in South Carolina in the lower Cherokee towns. So this is not really geographically accurate as we would see a map today, but this is kind of a schematic showing where, giving an idea of what the towns were, the Cherokee towns, and their relation to each other. Traditionally, we did not name bodies of water. We had towns along them. We had specific bends in the river, certain places in the river that did have a name. But the body of water itself was not considered a proper noun. All the creeks, the streams flowed into the rivers, which flowed into bigger rivers. And we acknowledge that. We acknowledge the interconnectivity of all these things. The idea that we all live downslope, that we all live downstream. So we have to take care of our land, we have to take care of our water, because somebody's below us. And somebody above us has to do their jobs to not mess things up for us. So this is all an integrated kind of a system. We ascribe to water a figurative idea. We looked at the rivers, the waterways, as its own spirit, its own system, its own ecology, might be a way we would phrase it today. We called him Oscar Yagonahita, called him the long man. We gave the waters personhood as its own organism, as its own being. But when the British came through and they were mapping these, over the decades, they started to name these rivers, started to name these waterways. So on this map and listed here are the rivers and creeks that still today bear the names of these towns. The stars are where the towns were. There's a lot of work now going on with projects in identifying traditional landscapes, not only with Cherokee, but other nations all over the world. In the southeast, in the original Cherokee territory, we have a lot of these waterways. A lot of times the names have been changed a little bit. They've been kind of corrupted through the English idea of them. Now, I'm from the Snowbird community. I'm not from Cherokee, North Carolina proper. My community is about 50 miles west of the Qualla boundary. And in our community, we live in it's Graham County. Here's some of the main waterways that still exist in my area. So Keetoowah, and then the syllabary, Geoye, is Otter Place, Ottertown. Steekoa comes from Usteegohee, the little place. Tallulah, we would pronounce that Delulu. There's a bigger story related to that I don't have quite time to get into, but it's connected to another town in Georgia in an area called Tallulah Falls. That Dellulah is literally the sound of a certain species of frog. Nantahala, we pronounce that Nantayeli, which means it comes up in the middle, referring to the sun. The Nantahala River runs through this really deep gorge. So it comes up in the middle is just how we recognize that. I think today on the postcards they call that Land of the Noonday Sun. I say the Cherokees called it Land of the Noonday Sun, and we didn't do that. But then again, it comes up in the middle, doesn't sell postcards. So there is that. Snowbird, my community, Tuti, is connected to the old stories, which we'll touch on some of these here in a little bit. It's connected to the story of the great snowbird, or the dark-eyed junco. And Buffalo, Yunshayi, is a Buffalo town. All these names here, these were towns. And the waterways got named after the town that was either at the headwaters, at the mouth, along the way there. And people don't think about this in the southeast, but we did have knowledge of buffalo. We did have buffalo in our area, bison, things like that. We were not as much of a nomadic culture. We didn't follow the herds. So they don't figure as much into our culture because they were only in the vicinity for certain times of the year. So now I want to get into talking about these specific sites and how that's related. If anybody was able to hear some of the storytellers, even some of the folks around just talking today, you'll hear a lot of, they'll say the old stories. When you go way back into the early stories, we talk about the great animals. And these are like the grandparents of the animals we have today. They were much larger. And for different species, for different reasons, those animals went away. We're left with their descendants. And again, it's kind of within the Cherokee culture, joking is pretty much just a standard course. Wherever two Cherokees are gathered, there's going to be laughter. So we laugh about a lot of these places, not because of the story they contain, but because of the proximity to the highway. A lot of these stories are literally right off the highway. This is just outside of Cherokee. Chalicugee is the snapping turtle place. The great snapping turtle, the first snapping turtle, lived in this bend of the Conalefta River. Some of these stories have a lot of context to go with them. Some of these stories are just exactly an animal lived here. This place, right under a bridge on Highway 19, where the Uktana got fastened. Uktana Juganan dot Junyin. Uktana is figurative in a lot of our stories. This particular spot is where he got stuck crossing the Tuckasegee River. And when he got stuck, anybody that saw anybody hold a snake down on the ground, hold it by the head, you can see its body thrash around, watch it try to break free. And that explains in our stories why we have all of these rocks in that river, as Uktana got stuck there. And then in this detail, you can see that the rocks are scarred, they're cut. And they're cut in an opposite direction of the way the water flows. And this is a marker of the Uktana. Now, we know with geology, with sedimentary rock, that, there are different layers of sediment. Some are harder than others, and over time, those softer layers will wash out. Doesn't change the idea of our tradition of this was an area where there was a lot of these animals that we call Uktane. This guy figures in a lot of our stories, in a lot of our traditions. The storytellers will talk to us about that instead of 4 cardinal directions, traditionally we have 7 directions. There's north, south, east, and west, of course. But there's also above, below, and here, where we are. Now, I don't mean for anybody to hear that and to put it in a different religious context. The beneath world is not Hades, is not Sheol, is not hell in that way. It's just a world that exists below this one. And things are different there. But it's not a place of punishment or anything like that. The world above is, again, it's just a different context, a different frame of existence. The gorgets that are shown here in the drawings, the one on the upper left came out of Moundville in South Alabama. The one below came out of Roane County, Tennessee, which is into the Cherokee territory. Moundville is a little bit south of us. That's more of Muskogee territory. And the dates of these range through the archaeological record anywhere from 1000 to 1450 AD. These are found in mound sites and in archaeological places. Culturally, it's against traditional belief to show an image of an actual artifact like this that come out of the ground. So we're just going to show you the drawings of them. But you can see that this animal shows up. In our stories, Uktana had spots going down his side. He had horns. And it was a ulan-shanti, which is a clear spot on his forehead, a clear scale that some people might want to interpret as a crystal. I was on the 4th floor earlier, and I couldn't tell by the interpretation what tribe it came from, but stylistically it looked to come out of the Pacific Northwest. If you go to the 4th floor of the NMAI here, there's a long bowl with an animal carved into it. And I looked, and he had spots going down his side, and he had horns on his head. This animal is not specific to us as Cherokee. The Mohawk have an animal with a different name, but the same description. The Muskogee, across North America, and we could even make the argument down into South America, Quetzalcoatl, with the plumed serpent down there, that this is a description of the same type of animal that figures heavily in our stories. He also appears beside the river. And we see this in petroglyphs. This is taken right outside of Cherokee County, on the border of Cherokee and Clay County, North Carolina. And you can see the squiggly carvings through there are Uktana. This is a reference in that spot The Hiawassee River is right there on the upper right corner. We just get a glimpse of the river there. That is a place where Uktana lives. And his appearance there marks a connection for us between the world below and this one right here. That this is a place where that beneath world can connect us. There's also places, conversely, that are connected to reaching the sky. I don't have a picture of it, but Pilot Knob, which is on the Blue Ridge Parkway, is one of those places where we can access the above world from that area. A little bit over from Hiawassee are a little area called Brasstown and Brasstown Creek. And again, talking about how fortunate we are to talk about our stories, how closely related we are with place and the connectivity. Maybe another time, or if y'all are ever coming down to my part of the world, we can talk about this more, is the connection of another figure in our stories called Jewel Kaloo. Also, corrupted English calls him Judah Cullah. And in our stories, Jewel Kaloo was the first scientist. He was the first biologist. And Jewel Kaloo taught us how to take care of the animals, how to take care of the water, how to take care of the land. And after a time that he felt that he had taught all that he could teach us, or that, as humans we had learned as much as our limited capacity will allow us, Jewel Kaloo left his area and went up Brasstown Creek. And you can see him marked up here in the upper right in that figure. That's Jewel Kaloo. But you can look below, and these photographs are all details of this diagram. Contextually, it's all on that one big rock in the upper left. That you can see also the Uktana in this area. And just so y'all don't think I'm just being completely creepy and just want to stand up here and talk to y'all about big snakes, along Valley River, this is a place called the Leech Place. A giant animal that was like a leech lived at this bend in Valley River. And there's to the left on this image, there is a steep slope and a small trail that's still there in places. It's only about maybe 18 inches wide. And in the stories, people would walk by this trail, and that animal would throw water up on it and cause people to slip and fall in to their doom. The fact that that fragment of that trail is still there into that place provides us the whole context to tell the story there. That it's not just a specific spot in the water, but again, it connects to the land. So these places that kind of connect in between these worlds. One of our elders and was given the title a few years ago, Beloved Man, Jerry Wolf, tells the story of how his grandfather entered into a scheme with a buddy of his as a young man, and they killed this animal, and did that by going to a rock ledge above this bend and setting it on fire, building a big fire on top of this rock, and then throwing cold water on it, causing it to crack. And eventually, that piece of rock became so white hot that it snapped off and fell down into the water and shattered and boiled the water and killed that leech. And we know historically in the 1820s, a man named Standing Wolf, who was indeed Mr. Wolf's, one of his grandparents further back, lived in this area, Janushiyi. Again, this is a specific spot on Valley River, but the Cherokee town that was in this area was also known as the Leech Place. A lot of these places, and we take these stories that sometimes have been published and go to elders with them and double check them to see exactly, see what their traditions are. Sometimes the traditions are a little bit different. And a lot of times the spelling is different, the way it's said. Sometimes it's because of time, over periods of time, things are referred to differently. Sometimes it's even dialect. I put up both variances of this. In the East, we call this Janushii, and from what I understand, with some folks in the Cherokee Nation, they call it Tlanushii, that TL. So I put both versions in there out of parody, just to be fair about things. So before we go out and do a lot of talks about these places and stuff, because if we're taking our kids there, if we're taking adults that want to learn about these things, we want to make sure the information is correct. And so we don't simply rely on a written record taken 100 years ago. It's a great start, but we also want to check with the elders and people that do have recollections of these stories, or sometimes additional information about these stories as to exactly what went on there and why that's important. Also, when talking to folks about this, there's a great, the idea of public education and the things that we're able to do with it now are incredible. We're able to have wayside exhibits, kiosks outside, you go to these places, you see that on battlefield parks, where you have all the stuff outside on the parkways, various places like that. Our elders and even some of our younger folks that are involved in learning these traditions are very adamant that in most cases, these things are not to be put out as signage. The idea being that once we make this a sign and maybe make a brochure to tell people how to get to this place, then it becomes a commodity. It just becomes something that is out there. Go read the sign, and you've done due diligence. Folks, our elders want to see this as a place where we're still interacting with these places, that we're still a part of this landscape. So, with that said, I must say now that my hypocrisy only goes so far. This is a place where we're going to have a kiosk. We're going to have an outdoor place. This area here is now Choga Lake, is in Clay County, North Carolina. It's a TVA lake. And when they flooded these valleys and things, now we have lakes where we never had them. To the left here, if the lake's ever drained, Shooting Creek runs into the Hiawassee. And the town that was here into the 18th century was Auguste Dogi. And contextually, we can't visualize this now. It's a lake. We don't know what that valley looked like. I don't know what that valley looked like to be able to get an idea of where that town specifically was. But in our stories, this is a very important place, and this story is before contact, that we had a group of beings that kind of help us out in times of trouble, in times of need. They're called the Nehui. You'll see that translated in literature as the immortals. They were the people that were always here. And these folks exist in those other worlds as well, where we can only as humans be in this one. And the story is that one day, through the sounds in the air, the Nehui told the people of this town that things were going to be different really soon. There was things going to change that was beyond our control, that was beyond the control of anybody that lived in that town. And it was going to get really hard. But if they wanted to, they could go into the council house and stay for 7 days and fast and pray. And don't raise a loud war whoop. Don't get loud in there. Just be real quiet, be considerate. And after 7 days, we'll come get you. Well, the word went around town, and people were hearing this, and they indeed went into that council house and stayed for 7 days and fasted. And nobody got loud. Everybody kept calm. And on that 7th day, the Nehui showed up and escorted those folks out of the council house down into Shooting Creek. And there was a whirlpool there, the spiral of the water. And they escorted them through that think of this in science fiction terms as a wormhole. Because even in theoretical physics, even though science fiction got a hold of this and made it something else, the idea of the space-time continuum, with the idea of these places that can get close to one another. Again, this is not a specific Cherokee thing. There are places like this all over the world. In Ireland, they call them thin spots. And they went down into this whirlpool and apparently went into that world below with the Nanahoe to stay, where they could live out their lives the way that they had grown up and the way their grandparents had grown up. When some of the earliest British explorers came through in the very early 1700s, they were talking to the folks in the surrounding towns. And that was the first written account of this story. And they were told, now bear in mind, the Spanish came through in 1540 for us. They came into the mountains and all that. But we didn't really start seeing folks, non-Indians, regularly for another 100 years. But the Cherokees there told them that, yeah, you can go to that townhouse. If you don't believe us, you can go there, and you can still see the remains of the houses. They're right. Nobody's moved there since they left, but what's left of their town is still there. And into the 1830s, people were still going, and they were fishing with nets, and they said that the people from this town would pull on their nets as they were dragging by. In 1838, the people from the other closer towns, before they went to the removal forts to be taken west, went to this place and said their goodbyes and told them why they were having to leave and that they were going to be gone. And that's what they did before they went to Fort Butler a few miles away. So this is the interpretive panel that's going to be going at this site. Down in the bottom right, you see a little QR code. We'll be able to, if anybody's got a smartphone, to clock in on that and hear this story told in the Cherokee language. And you'll have the written versions here in English. And we'll have, and there's music, a little soundtrack behind the story. And again, we need to do this here so that we can have an idea of the context, because the context on the site's gone. In talking to some elders about this, he said, and he's a friend of mine, he's from the Cherokee Nation, and as a matter of fact, his family, before heading west, came from Shooting Creek. But we're talking about this site, and he said, people mark things, not necessarily always permanently, as a sign that people were there. And the idea of the Trail of Tears and the removal was that people were taken away from their homeland. But with the Eastern Band still existing in North Carolina, there's still a touchstone. There's a place for folks in the Cherokee Nation. They can be from there. They're still of that place because their people are still there. That the people of Shooting Creek, when they left that area, headed west, they were leaving themselves. But the idea of this story and the people of this town still being there, still that touchstone still remained for those families. That's still a Cherokee site and will always be a Cherokee site, simply because it is where it is. And sometimes these stories and these places still hold meaning in another sense, in a different sense. Water is very important, of course, and east-facing springs are very important to us. There's a specific one in Tennessee called the Blue Hole, where they held, when the Cherokee Nation convened before the removal, was near this place. It's a spring due to the chemical makeup of the rocks and the temperature of the water is actually blue, just like a child's drawing with a crayon. And you can kind of see it in that hazy part here, the color shift here we're dealing with. Don't make it as easy to see. But anytime folks are going down there, you'll always see empty milk jugs going. because someone's instructed them, bring us some water out of that spring. Tri-Council in 2015, and Tri-Council was when the councils from the United Keetoowah Band, the Cherokee Nation, and the Eastern Band came and met at this spot, which was the last council house of the Cherokee Nation prior to removal, came back to Red Clay, Tennessee, where the national park still holds that site, and acknowledged that the blue hole was still there. Folks were still going down there to the water, washing up, taking those milk jugs to take that water back to elders who couldn't make it down themselves. The only reason I can say that is I've done it myself, so I'm not telling anybody else's story. But these places like this are always in folks' minds. And what we're trying to do is let as many folks as we can know about these stories, learn these stories, because it's these stories in these places that make us who we are. We are Ani Keetoowah Gi. We're the people of Keetoowah. We're the people of a place. And the knowledge of that place, for us to have that, is in a sense taking back that authority of who we are. We are of the place that we say we're from. So, Shkina, God, thank you. That's all I got.
Thank you, TJ. We want to open this up for question and answer. Anybody have any questions they would like to ask TJ?
Yes, sir. As a matter of fact, and that's a great question, cosmography is not something as Cherokees, it's only ours. Any people, any group of people that's lived somewhere long enough have these stories. Sometimes they may not go back as far, but in western North Carolina, in the Appalachian Mountains, there are stories of like animals called the hoop snake, things like that, this snake will roll down, the snake will bite its own tail and roll down the hill and then throw its tail at you to stab you. I call it the white man's Uktana. But, cosmography can be anything from historical period stories or stories of something weird happened here, something out of the ordinary. And I think any culture, any group of people that's been in a place long enough, they all have cosmography. The place is what makes us as people, Dominant American society now has become very mobile. Where I'm from is deep Appalachia, and we'll ask folks, somebody who hadn't seen before, well, where are you from? I'm from here. No, you're not. I can tell by how you're talking. You're not from here. I'm a Cherokee Indian whose family's been here since the last Ice Age, asking you where you're from. Where are you from? And it's that lack of connection, I think, that leads us to invalidate others to some degree. Most of these sites, now, the petroglyphs and the rock art notwithstanding, you're not going to see archaeology there. At a place where the snapping turtle lived, there's not going to be any archaeology related to a snapping turtle there. But that story exists. So, archaeologists are looking at that. This whole thing with DAPL going on in the Dakotas. The archaeologists say, well, there's no archaeology there. No, there's not. That's not what they're saying. That is their cosmographic sites that's at risk. So you're not going to find that type of archaeology. So that type of compliance doesn't apply to this. The gentleman here with our forestry program and stuff got a little bit ahead of the Forest Service a few years ago. We created a integrated resources management plan to talk about, because we are a small land base now and a growing population, so there's a lot of pressures on our surroundings now. And these guys here were very active in spearheading and creating this IRMP. But they reached out to different offices, different places, and said, we've got to have these cultural sites built into the management plan, not only the documentation and the marking of them, but to what that means. So in in a way, taking our traditional ideas and putting and doing as best as we can to format them into a government document that can be applied as we go into the future. And I'll admit that I'm not a fluent speaker, to my great shame. Working on that. But in the language, there's very few, and that was one reason I went down that list of the river names, is there are very few proper nouns in the Cherokee language. There's a description, and buried within that description is a broader story, a broader context. I didn't have time with the presentation to go as far out with this as I wanted to, but even in some of the earlier designs, even in the pottery, are references to water, just in the simple design, connected to the creation story. So that even as people were cooking their beans, what they were using was a reference to our story of creation. So this was not, these things didn't exist in blocks, the way epistemology is now, the ways of learning. We break everything out. There's science, there's math, there's this and that. With us, it's an integrated whole. You couldn't take one part out. So even simply buried within the name of a place was a much bigger story behind that. And being able to have that understanding is what we're really pushing our children and anybody interested in learning these things, to get them to start thinking that way again.
Is that it? Is that any other questions? Okay.
Ski,
Well, that-
thank you.
That concludes our presentations for today, but I'll just remind everybody that if you're interested, tomorrow we'll have a new presentation called Emergence in a Matrilineal Society, and this is where we're talking about developing leadership and how that comes through in our matrilineal society. We also will have a repeat of the Sequoia, a Legend and His Legacy presentation tomorrow as well. There'll also be OCO Voices of the Cherokee People, which is a film screening by the Cherokee Nation. So thank you all for coming. We've enjoyed having this opportunity to present this information to you, and thank you for your interaction. Have a great evening.